Hi everyone, James here from F9 Audio and the Freemasons, and today I'm immensely proud to finally present to you a disco pack that I hope will become legendary. Welcome to the walkthrough of F9 TRAX Electric Disco 2. As many of you know, disco is a musically rich and technically complex art form, and for months I've been promising to brain dump as many tricks and tips that I can think of for this genre on a video. Then we had a brainwave. Why not write all of those tricks and tips into the actual TRAX projects and then show you throughout the course of this video? This way we get to advertise our new release and you get a ton of golden information that you may not have even considered. So let's not waste any more time, let's roll our sleeves right up and dive straight into the funk. So welcome back to F9 TRAX. This is what you get in this fantastic release. 5 of these fully featured DAW projects. And apart from just a few loops that I'm highlighting here, every single part, including all of the music in this release, is being triggered by multi-sampled instruments and MIDI. So for example, if I go to the bass here, there's all of the notes that are playing it back. And all of this is based in this particular release on a fantastic 8GB library that you can plug directly into your own productions. And it can either be loaded via the Logic patch system or from Ableton racks. And what sets these projects apart is that they require absolutely no third-party plugins to operate. They just use the built-in tools from your DAW. We can show you here just how good your DAW can sound if it is fed the right source sounds. Okay, let's start digging into the fun stuff. So as you can hear, that is not just a one-note bass line. There's an awful lot of movement and information on there. And I want to start from the top down with these projects, and we're going to talk about kick drums. One of the biggest things that I have learned over the entire process of putting these 3 electric disco packs together is that shorter kicks are 100% the way forward. So I've actually bounced down the kick drum from this project and put it up against some different types of kicks so you can see the difference. Have a look at it against a standard house kick. Look at the length of that trail. In fact, if I just bump this up a little bit, you can see how much more sub and bass information there is on a house kick drum there compared to this nice short and sharp kick drum from the pack. Now, to give you some kind of point of reference, I've also included the kick from a Linn drum. And what's vital to understand about a Linn drum is that it was recorded from an acoustic drum in the first place. It was a very good bit of engineering and it's become a classic kick drum. But look at the length of it. It's absolutely tiny compared to these other kick drum types. Now, one of the problems I always had making new disco is that I was trying to use house kicks. And for some reason, it just doesn't sound quite right. It just sounds like a house record, where kind of what you often want to do is be pulling this all the way back and then actually fading the damn thing out so that you get a much shorter kick drum. That will give you a more authentic disco feel. When you have that much space, you have plenty of room for busy bass lines like this, particularly ones that are moving between notes. And this is the biggest tip that I want to impart to you for drum production within this. Shorten your kicks. And obviously within this pack, we've already done that for you. And by utilizing nice tight kicks like that, you're not swamping your rhythm tracks with information, so you can get far more out of the other elements. And whilst we're on the subject of kick drums, I just want to show you this little trick on the Ritual project. Let me just solo these parts. Can you hear this additional little kick? It's softened, and you can see here that we've taken the high cut filter all the way down, and it's positioned on the fourth measure of a particular beat. And you'll see it's just slightly off grid. We can even move it a little bit back and make that swing more pronounced. So instead of being exactly on the bar line, it's just pushed back to give it a real groove. You hear that funky flick that it just gives things? Now, these kind of frills are my homage to the amazing George Brown, the drummer from Kool and the Gang. And I implore all of you to go and listen to Jungle Boogie, one of his finest pieces of work. It is such a groove, and we are all standing on the shoulders of the giants from this era. So now let's move on to what's known as the backbeat. And by backbeat, I mean the position of a drum groove where the claps and the snares would normally sit. And to do that, we've nipped into this project. It's called Republic 110 BPM. Now, let me just mute all the instruments and we'll have a much closer look now at this drum groove. Now, you might think that the kick drum is the most important part of a drum production like this, but it's not in disco. It is all about the backbeat. And most importantly, it's all about the claps. And we've got some very clever layering techniques that I want to show you here. To start off the clap pattern, we have a nice tight clap that is 100% quantized. It's electronic source, and it just gives a nice tight clack against that kick drum. But we then layer up two live clap parts, and when I put these in, I deliberately turned off the input quantization, and if you look, they are all at slightly different positions off the actual grid. Now, if I click on both of them here, you'll be able to see both notes, and you'll also see that it's two different passes, and they exist at different times. There we go. You can see one's slightly in front and one's behind, and it's also triggering different actual notes. So on the live clap patch of this, we've got a whole series of different claps set across a keyboard. So that allows us to get real variation into these clap parts, not only by playing different notes across different passes, but by keeping the record quantize off and the human feel. And why is this important? Well, it's exactly what would happen if you had a series of people clapping in a recording studio. Some would be in front of the beat, some would be slightly behind, and it's an inherent sound that we remember from 70s disco. We've also added some clap loops, here. Lovely dry one there. This one's a wetter clap loop. And these have what we call pre-shifts. So you see this little bit of information that happens just before the place where the clap would be if it was actually quantized. And these are vital. They create a sound that is absolutely synonymous with modern disco productions. And if you want to know where we got these loops from, it's because we've got this entire extra loop section. It's available here as pre-warped loops for Ableton, and in Logic they're available as either Apple loops and WAV loops as well. Now, the principal ones I would say here are these groove loops, and we've supplied them at a whole variety of different tempos. There's 26 actual groove loops at all of these different tempos. So let's just dive into the 120 and we'll play through. There's so many little gems in there, I can't tell you. Here are some additional clap loops. And when you start to layer those groove loops with the clap loops against the tight program drums, the results can be absolutely dynamite. There is just something special sometimes about a loop, something that can't be replicated just with programming. And obviously we need a snare drum. And I've got an interesting little technique here. I've got a very tight snare drum right up against the actual quantize point. And then I've got a pre-shift sound that's just in front of the beat. Let me zoom in so you can see it. You see it's just in front of the actual bar measure there. It's very short and it sounds like this. And you'll see that I'm triggering different notes on this menu patch here, and that's giving some variation of the pre-shifts. But listen to what happens when I put them together. So that's really brought our snare part to life. Now I'm actually going to solo everything. Almost forgot to show you, this is the composite of the groove loops that we've added to this production. 3 of them. So there's already a lovely degree of looseness and groove within that. So what I'm going to play you now are all of the backbeat instruments. And you see that human feel in there that's created by all of the different levels of variations that we have within the loops and within the programmings of the MIDI parts. And once that's in the final production, you get this. And that brings me nicely onto the subject of hi-hats. Now, one thing I've noticed really putting modern disco productions together is that often the hats are much more laid back than we might be used to. Now, I come from the era where we just layered things up with top-end tambourine shakers, you name it. But I find with modern disco productions, it's much cooler and better to have the hi-hats simple and quite pulled back. So again, a lovely solid groove there, but this is just the hi-hat pattern. And all it's really doing is keeping time, and then you can pick up interesting little accents with things like percussion. And this seems to be a much cooler and better way of doing things. It certainly sounds a lot more modern. And because you're not jamming up the top end, it allows you to brighten up a lot of the instruments and get the funk and the movement out of those parts, as you can hear throughout this entire pack. So I'm sure by now you're starting to get a feel for some of the quality of the sounds and the patches that are inside this production. And I've just pulled up one of the startup pages. These are incredibly popular with our customers because they allow you instant inspiration. This one contains all of the drum sounds, all of the drum patches, and all of the key and bass patches on one page. Perfect to just start writing. And being MIDI or using Apple loops, it means that you can change the tempo to whatever you wish and start working. This one starts at 120, but most of the sounds are being triggered by MIDI. And as well as all of the usual suspects, we've got some excellent additional percussion sounds. This is a collection of hits from flexitones, bells, and chimes. We've got a really solid collection of cowbells that were all taken from vintage drum machines and vintage sampler discs. And as it seems you guys just can't get enough of them, a whole load more electric disco toms. And one of my absolute favourites, the reverb drum hits. These are kind of non-linear and ambience-based reverbs that have been applied heavily to a series of toms. With a degree of distortion, but when you put them into a production, they can be incredibly powerful. So this is the Munich page. It's at 123 BPM, E minor, and it's referencing that post-disco move into high energy that came across mainly from Europe. So you hear the power that non-linear and room-style reverb really brings to those sounds. When it's baked into a patch like that, it's great fun to program. But there's two other little techniques I want to show you here. First is this cowbell pattern that actually appears in the intro and throughout the track. And another one is this little clap patch with lots of delay on. Let's hear them in solo on this build-up. These kind of patterns were used all over the post-disco sound, particularly as the drum machines started getting involved. And there's a very good reason for it, and it's actually quite interesting. The lighting controllers from nightclubs in the 80s were often at the beginning of their era of being triggered by audio, and often they would listen for high mid and high frequency content because that is where normally the most exciting part of the track is. So producers learn when programming drum patterns to have percussion parts like that would kind of hit the lights harder so that they would actually flash a little bit brighter and a little bit faster at those moments. There's a brilliant interview with Arthur Baker on the Rock on Tours podcast on Spotify where he talks about hearing dubbed out 808 claps echoing around a nightclub for the first time. And with that firing off all the lights as well, it's understandable why these kind of effects and these production techniques that we now take for granted, really, must have had such a lasting effect on the luminary producers of that time. So that's it for this video, but please don't forget to check out the rest of the video series for F9 TRAX Electric Disco 2, where we go through everything, not only the production techniques and all the tricks we learnt there, not only the sound sources, but also the musical theory and the mixing of modern disco. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you soon.